effectively communicate, be direct, but also someone who can be a bulldog against Republican attacks. And also, there's this idea that he's someone who has had the back of civil rights leaders in his own state. I was just talking on the phone with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and he said that he thought this choice was brilliant. He told me, and this was his words, he's not just an old white guy, is what he said, even though he's 60 years old, only a few months older than the vice president. But he said that because, he says, Tim Walz appointed the first black woman to the Minnesota Supreme Court. He's also someone who took the county prosecutor who was going to be in charge of the George Floyd case and took him off the case and put the Attorney General Keith Ellison on the case. And Keith Ellison told me there would be no George Floyd prosecution. There would be no George Floyd case if it were not for Tim Walz. So you can expect to hear more about how he was instrumental in doing that. And Keith Ellison told me he felt morally outraged by the death of George Floyd and wanted to make sure that that family got justice. And he ensured that they did get justice because of that. Of course, that officer was convicted in that case and remains in prison to this day. So there really is a lot of feeling that Tim Walz is going to be able to add a lot to this ticket. And lastly, he's someone who, even though, again, Minnesota's a blue state, he knows how to knock on doors. He knows how to build connections. He knows how to convince people that may be moderates, moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans, to feel like they are part of the vision for America that now the Harris-Walz campaign is going to be talking to about and talking with voters about. Jose?
So what do you think the message is that the vice president is making or made by this decision to bring Walz in? She looked at a number of different candidates from different states that had different strengths and maybe some weaknesses. What does Walz bring to this?
Well, I'll say two things. First, I think the message the vice president is sending is that this was her decision. There were a lot of individuals, I think, who would have, and even folks who were a part of giving recommendations and their thoughts and views to the vice president about who they thought would be a good running mate for her. Some of those folks thought that that was Governor Walz. There were others who thought that those were other individuals. But at the end of the day, picking a running mate is the most important, frankly, and the first presidential level decision that a nominee makes. And with this decision, Vice President Harris has made it quite clear that she is the one in the driver's seat here. This was not a group activity, if you will. I think Governor Walz is a remarkable choice, frankly. He was a former teacher. I also would like to note he is a native Nebraskan, and as a native Nebraskan, you know, we're going to claim Tim Walz every time we see him. I saw him recently and noted we really know where his bread is buttered. But truly, in an election where it comes down to how people are feeling and do the candidates and the campaigns understand what folks are going through and do they have a plan to address that for their lives, Governor Walz adds a lot to the ticket. It's my understanding that that was also something that was important to the vice president and part of why she landed on Governor Walz. He and his wife, they went through IVF. His daughter's name is Hope, and he himself has said her name is Hope for a reason, because her literal birth, the conception of her and her birth gave them hope. So that is something a lot of families across the country obviously are dealing with. Obviously, a really strong juxtaposition, if you will, with the Trump-Vance campaign, how they are talking about reproductive freedom and healthcare and the ability IVF and families to make the decisions that they need. So this is, I think, a very compatible choice, and the executive level experience is something also very important. At the end of the day, she is not just picking someone who is going to help her win 270 electoral votes. She is selecting someone that, if she is elected as president of the United States, will be the vice president, someone who she would like to be ready on day one, much like then candidate Biden, now President Biden, talked about and thought about when he picked her as his running mate almost 4 years ago.
Julian, what do you make of the vice president's choice of Governor Walz to be her running mate? What does Walz bring to the Democratic ticket that maybe others couldn't?
Well, I think what he brings is a lot of great energy, terrific vibe. I mean, he seems happy, Jose. I mean, you think about the contrast with J.D. Vance. You think of J.D. Vance right now, and the word that comes to mind is scolding, right, or angry. And it's the complete opposite with Walz. It's the happy warrior, but somebody who's inclusive, who understands governing. He's going to be a strong partner, I think, an effective partner if Kamala Harris is elected as a governor, as somebody who also can, in the campaign, relate to everyday people. He's able to both, wear a camouflage hunter's jacket and then also talk about the importance of universal school lunches for children. So he has a range that is able to appeal both to the base and also to those voters, those white working class voters that they need to get in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I think that's why she selected him. On top of that, I think he's in keeping with the cardinal rule of vice presidential politics. Choose somebody who will do no harm. I have confidence through that vetting process. That's probably what she found. That doesn't mean that everybody else on that list had an issue. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that they vetted him well. And I think what they found was this is a solid choice. This is somebody who's going to really help in the next 3 months and will be an effective governing partner beyond that.
Carlos, I know that you, when you were in the House, served alongside with then Congressman Walz, who I believe when he was in the House had an A+ rating by the NRA, then went to an F rating by the NRA. He certainly has positions that have changed on that issue alone.
That's right, Jose. Tim Walz was someone I knew. He well in the House. He was someone who was easy to work with, a gentleman, bipartisan, always involved in all the bipartisan deal making. When he left the House, he had to run in a Democratic primary for governor, and I think he probably shifted some of his positions to the left. But clearly, what the Harris campaign is going for here is balance. And it presents a contrast to what the Trump campaign tried to do, right? With their choice, it was MAGA ×2, double down on conservative populism. Here, I think the Democratic campaign is recognizing the top of the ticket is a progressive from California. Let's find a moderate Democrat from the center of the country.
Charles, if I could, and we're just watching these live pictures out of St. Paul, Minnesota, where we see that those two cars leaving the governor's house right now, and let's listen and see. It's pretty tinted of them, but you can see that this is one of those official cars with the red and blue lights in the back. This one does not, so there's some waving from inside, and there's this SUV, and this is live pictures from St. Paul, Minnesota. Looks like the governor has just left. And I'm sorry, Carlos, to interrupt you.
So, yeah, I was just saying, Jose, that I think what Democrats are trying to do is replicate the winning formula from 2020. In 2020, they put forward a candidate in Joe Biden that tried to appeal to the center of the country. Some would say that maybe he didn't govern that way later, but certainly the perception was that Joe Biden was a deal maker, someone who got along with Republicans. That is what Tim Walz is. So it's the same formula as 2020 for Democrats, but inverted. Now the progressive candidate is at the top of the ticket, and the more centrist deal-making candidate is the vice presidential nominee.
Maura Barrett is right out in St. Paul, Minnesota. Maura?
You can hear the cheering around me. Several SUVs just exited the property. We were able to see some people loading up some luggage in the vehicles here just outside Governor Walz's home, presumably as he heads to Philadelphia to join presidential candidate Kamala Harris as the newly selected vice presidential candidate. And the vibe on the ground here as we've been hanging out, talking to folks, is a feeling of euphoria. One gentleman I just spoke to said, here in Minnesota, we produce vice presidents, referring to Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale, of course. And so Minnesota is very excited to be put on the map here this morning. Walz's team even telling me over the last 2 weeks that this attention has been unexpected and crazy, but they're clearly excited to take it on. We were at a fundraiser last night for the Democrats for Kamala Harris, in which Walz spoke alongside the other Minnesota senators, and you could feel he was exuberant and excited. It's unclear if he knew he was the pick at that point, but we did know yesterday that Harris had narrowed down her two options. And he spoke to what seemed like what could be a stump speech in these next coming days that we'll potentially see. He talked about bringing in Republicans, how he's used to interacting with Republicans in Minnesota. He has a really strong record on both the Democratic and Republican side. He said, the Republicans are my neighbors, and we need to give them an option in this race. And we need to show them how we do Minnesota politics by spreading joy. And so that might be some foresight in what we see on the campaign trail coming up, but that feeling of joy and euphoria definitely palpable here on the ground in St. Paul, Jose.
You know, Julian, I'm kind of curious, and you had a very interesting thread on X recently about, you know, you were vetted by Hillary Clinton as a potential running mate back in 2016. Take us inside that process. What was it like?
Well, it's super thorough, very involved for us. You know, there was a questionnaire that you started off with, had more than 150 questions on it, went through everything. Your legal history, employment history, financial history, personal family history, medical history. Folks had to get a medical exam to prove the campaign that you were fit to serve in the office. And then you went through a 5 or 6 hour vetting with lawyers who asked follow-up questions on that. And then another round of that. And then finally, an interview with the nominee herself. And so it was, you know, really, really precise, direct, blunt, and thorough. This was very compressed, this vetting process, but they did have a great team doing it. So I'm confident that they also got to, you know, all of the things that might be lurking out there that might cause political issues. And after taking that in, and also the chemistry and politically what they need on the map in November, I think this is a good choice for Kamala Harris.
And Simone, I want to read you all it's coming across right now. Former President Obama and Michelle Obama have just put out a release, and I'm just going to read you part of it. It says, when a presidential candidate chooses a running mate, it says a lot about who they are and what kind of president they will be. By selecting Tim Walz to be her vice president, although it's candidate, but I'm reading directly, by selecting Tim Walz to be her vice president from a pool of outstanding Democrats, Kamala Harris has chosen an ideal partner and made it clear exactly what she stands for. This is, in many ways, Simone, a very strong message to get people incentivized to come out and vote on the 5th of November.
Absolutely, Jose, and I would even argue before, you know, in talking to a lot of Democratic strategists, if you will, and even some Republican strategists, they have noted that, look, the vice president had a really great, you know, strong rollout. Last 2 weeks were great. She is going to get a bump from this VP nom, this running mate selection, and then convention. But then after that, they say it's business as usual. But the reality is, because this is so truncated, after that, people start voting. In the first week of September, in some places in our country, even some battleground states, early voting starts taking place. And so this momentum, if you will, that the Harris campaign has with this pick again, and then obviously the convention is about a week and a half away. It has the potential to continue to carry through with the strong infrastructure and the organizing that the campaign has been doing to make them successful. I will say there has been lots of talk today about who was not chosen, right, and maybe why other people were not chosen. And I defer to Mr. Castro right here. But the reality here is that usually the vetting process is a private process, and it's private because the people who are being vetted, they have to agree to be vetted. Like, you have to agree to have the wool peeled back, and they look in all your closets to make sure everything's all right, Jose. And the reality is, I have heard. When then candidate Biden was going through this process, he noted he never wanted this to reflect poorly on anyone who was not picked. And as my understanding, the vice president also feels the same way. And so this idea that Governor Walz was picked and not Governor Shapiro or someone else because there was something wrong with, any of the other candidates, I think the focus should be on, for, Democrats and strategists out there who are doing this Monday morning quarterbacking, should be on the pick that the vice president did make. Because at the end of the day, it is her decision. And it comes down to what she is comfortable with, what she wants, and what she sees as the vision for her administration if she is to be elected.